When tours are given at Fort Mifflin, the casemates, often referred to as the dungeons, are a very popular area. There are 6 casemates, each with a different use at different times. These dark and gloomy dungeons were not part of the original design of the fort.
The casemates were added to the fort whenever it was rebuilt by 1798. These structures did not exist in the original fort, so during the shelling, the men have no place of refuge. So whenever they rebuilt the fort, they added it to them. They're known as the bomb-proofs, which would be a place of refuge if the fort was ever again attacked.
Fortunately, for the men at Fort Mifflin, there never was another bombing because the construction of the casemates was not very sound. In a report from May 20th, 1807, Jonathan Williams, the inspector of fortifications, said the casemates at Fort Mifflin are not inhabitable and they leak. In spite of this report, the casemates were used to house people during the Civil War.
During the Civil War, the casemates were converted over to be prisoners, to hold Confederate prisoners, federal prisoners for petty crimes, and political prisoners. It was used as a prison for approximately 2 years. Casemate 1 housed approximately 200 Confederate prisoners for 2 years. Casemate number 5, which is the last room back inside of this structure, housed approximately 70 Union prisoners, including one Private Howe, who was in for murder and was hung here. The little rooms were for political prisoners. But conditions were so bad here, between mosquitoes, disease, poor food, lack of sanitation, that after 2 years, they had to end it as a prison. And that ended the fort's service in the Civil War.
Private William H. Howe of the 116th Pennsylvania Volunteers was the only man to be hanged at Fort Mifflin. Many other men were sentenced to die at the fort, but President Lincoln commuted their death sentences. Some say Private Howe was used as an example for other deserters and those with anti-war sentiments.
Private Howe deserted. A detachment went after him, and he killed the officer in charge. He was then tried and sentenced to hang. He was brought here to be held over and to be hung here. He was kept in casemate number 5, the back room. Whenever they hung him, they built the gallows. And then after they hung him, they took it down. To pay for the hangman, they had to throw a party, though, and charge admission.
According to legend, the gallows used to hang Private Howe were right here. And until this day, grass will not grow in this part of the parade grounds. Howe admitted to deserting, but not to killing anyone. In spite of the fact that no one saw the killing, Howe was hanged at 7 minutes past noon, August 26, 1864. Now, more than 130 years later, the legend of Private William H. Howe still lives on at Fort Mifflin.
A lot of people believe that the faceless man may be Private Howe, but primarily because he would have had a hood over his face at the time of his death.
The faceless man has been seen outside the casemates sitting on the concrete ledge. When people look into his face, there's nothing there. Several reenactments of the famous sea battle at Fort Mifflin have taken place over the past couple of years. Some of the reenactors spend the night at the fort and have slept in the casemates. In Casemate 1 and Casemate 5, reenactors claim to have had some odd encounters.
There's a story of the Revolutionary soldier who was warming himself at the fireplace here in Casemate number 1. A friend of mine was staying overnight. He's a reenactor. Woke up one night, there was a soldier dressed in Revolutionary War garb warming himself at the fireplace. The door to this room was shut and latched from the inside. Whenever he got up to see who it was, he turned around momentarily. Whenever he turned back around, there was nobody there, and the door was still locked.
When some people enter the casemates, they have a very uncomfortable feeling. Members of the Philadelphia Ghost Hunters Alliance have visited Fort Mifflin and looked into this phenomenon.
Philadelphia Ghost Hunters Alliance has investigated Fort Mifflin and thus far 3 times, 2 of those times being overnight investigations. And with each time we've had some interesting results that were worthy of documentation. Casemate 5, of course, has had a history to it before the Philadelphia Ghost Hunters Alliance was even brought in to investigate. Casemate 5 itself, when you enter it, it has a different feeling to it. You almost feel repelled from the room.
Some of Fort Mifflin's ghosts are seen as orbs of light, while others, like Jacob the blacksmith, are seen in their humanly form. The blacksmith shop in any fort is an important area. Weapons, tools, and utensils are often in need of repair. At Fort Mifflin, one of the former blacksmiths is said to still work in the old blacksmith shop.
Our blacksmith, as far as we know, his name's Jacob Sauer, and we get that name from the psychic who came to visit here. We had a little problem with Jacob several years ago. Actually, it went on for about 2 years. We would close the door to the blacksmith shop, and he would open the door to the blacksmith shop. And this would go on and on, day after day, only in hot weather.
Why would the blacksmith waste time playing games with the doors of his shop?
Jacob gets hot, and so he will open the door occasionally to let some cool air in. We haven't heard much from him lately, but that doesn't mean he's not there.
One tour guide's encounter with Jacob gave him cause for concern.
Jacob's been seen several times. He's not a bad guy, from what I hear, but Jacob's been seen back around the blacksmith shop. As a matter of fact, one of the other tour guides, he saw something back there. He was up toward the buildings, the soldiers' barracks. He saw something or somebody go in the blacksmith shop. It was closing time, so there should have been nobody in the fort. Well, he went back there to see who it was. And then he saw, as he came into the blacksmith shop, something leapt out the back door. And as he says, it looked like a ghost to him. He was very shook up by it. Again, I have no reason to disbelieve him at all, because he was shook up. I saw him maybe 20 minutes after it happened, and he was still shook.
Jacob isn't the only ghost at Fort Mifflin who likes to tease the staff. The old Army hospital has a playful ghost of its own.
The offices of Fort Mifflin are across the street over at the old hospital building. It was built before the Civil War, obviously used during the Civil War for people who were ill.
You would think an Army hospital would be full of sorrow and despair, but the ghost that seems to stick around is anything but sad.
I work over in the office, which used to be a hospital building during the Civil War. The hospital was on the top floor and the mess hall was on the bottom floor. I've had several experiences in the office with a gentleman named Edward. When I first started working at the fort, his silhouette was on my computer. He plays games with me. He hides files. Twice he had raised the window during the wintertime. I got a little angry because it was cold, but he hides pencils, and he had locked me in the bathroom for about 20 minutes on a Friday night.
Seeing a ghost can be very scary. But what if you found out you didn't just see a ghost, but spoke to one as well? Some visitors to the fort may have done just that.